Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. May I please ask you to take your seats? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, boa tarde a todos. Good evening. My name is Chitra Stern, and I'm on the board of the American Club in Lisbon. And this year we had the great privilege of being one of the sponsors of the club as the Martinel Group. And this is the third real estate event that we have co-organized with the American Club of Lisbon. Thank you very much, Patrick and Anne, for the honor. Thank you. We are so happy to be hosting this real estate meetup. It's actually the final one for this year. So, it's a bit sad, but hopefully there'll be future opportunities. It has been a successful year of sponsorship, and I thank Patrick, Anne, and the board for everything. Now coming on to this evening's highlight, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all to this this gathering, to welcome our esteemed guest, where we're joined by a visionary whose work has not just shaped landscapes, but also redefined urban regeneration. Today, we have the honor of hearing from Mr. Nick Searl, managing partner at Argent, the masterminds behind the transformation of the King's Cross area in London. King's Cross, once an underutilized industrial wasteland, has been transformed into one of the most vibrant, sustainable, and innovative parts of London. This incredible transformation is a testament to the foresight, dedication, and expertise of Argent and its talented team, led by pioneers like Nick. Nick's journey with Argent reflects an exceptional blend of strategic insight and a deep commitment to community and sustainability. His work goes beyond mere construction. It's about creating spaces that inspire, connect, and endure. Under your guidance, King's Cross has become a symbol of urban renewal, blending history with modernity and nature with architecture. The King's Cross development under Nick's leadership has not only provided state-of-the-art office spaces, homes, and public areas, but has also fostered a sense of community. It's a place where businesses thrive, people live happily, and visitors from all around the world come to experience the vibrancy of London. I personally try to go there every time I'm in London, even staying in one of the fine hotels that are now there. These did not exist some years ago. Nick's approach to development is holistic. It's about understanding the needs of a community, respecting the environment, and creating spaces that are inclusive and accessible to all. He believes in the power of placemaking to transform not just physical spaces, but also the lives of those who inhabit them. Ladies and gentlemen, as we listen to Nick today, let us take inspiration from his vision and his unwavering commitment to excellence. His work at King's Cross is a blueprint for urban development, showcasing how spaces can be designed with creativity, care, and a deep sense of responsibility towards the community and the environment. Please join me in warmly welcoming a true change maker in urban development, a leader in sustainable and innovative design, Mr. Nick Searl of Argent.
Thank you.
Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Chitra. I will do everything I can to live up to that billing. I'm here to talk to you about King's Cross and Brent Cross Town tonight. But I have to start with a shameful admission. I suspect most of you will recognise that is one of your local teams. That was the team in 1982. And the reason I put up there is because the last time I was in Lisbon was 1982. I was on a rail trip round, 18 years old, couldn't afford to stay in hotels, so we just slept on trains and went wherever. And we came to Lisbon, me and my friend, and we had a piece of paper that his brother had given to him with a name and address on it. And we went to this address and we knocked on the door. And 5 days later, about 20 people waved us off at the station, sobbing as if we'd known them all our lives and we were leaving. And we promised them as we left that we'd be back. I'm back. Okay. It took me 41 years, but I'm back. So whoever you were, thank you for looking after us. The people of Lisbon were incredible back then, and I know they are now. Incredible segue. 1982 was also the year that Argent was founded by two brothers. They were actually both lawyers in their 20s, but they didn't really want to do law, and they founded a business which I think this bit is important for everything that you're going to hear, which employed people who were architects, I'm an architect, engineers, planners, they were people from the from the professions. It wasn't accountants, it wasn't generally lawyers apart from themselves, it wasn't surveyors even. The DNA of our business from day one was practitioners, people who loved the process of designing and making things. And that lives through to today. These are a couple of the early things that we did, just so you can see some of the DNA. This is Brindley Place in Birmingham, which we did in the 1990s. We built that square before we built any of the buildings, which was a very odd thing at the time, but it changed the nature of a very rundown part of the city. This was Piccadilly in Manchester. Again, the public space and the public setting were actually the transformational aspects, not the buildings themselves. And of course, King's Cross. Those are the three things that we're best known for. We've done other things, but it's these large-scale urban developments. About 8 years ago, we joined forces with Related, who are the largest private development company in the US, and we created Related Argent. And actually, that is the business that from the beginning of next year, we will all be working for. We have a pipeline of about 1.3 million square feet of mixed-use projects, all in London at the moment, but potentially going to be outside. And part of that is going to be actually managing King's Cross, because having got involved with it in 2000, that's when we first became involved, we will finish the construction in 2 years' time. So again, as a bit of context here, 25 years from us first getting involved to actually completing this development. Just think for a moment what's changed in your lives, what's changed in the world in 25 years. It's one of the challenges of large-scale urban development that the world is going considerably faster than you can go. And that means that there is ever-changing context for what you're doing, and that's really important. The site that we inherited and took on actually was a goods yard that was built in the mid-1800s. The most miraculous thing I found when I got there in 2007, I joined in 2007, was that it was still there to be done. It was still sitting there. You'll see in a minute that it was derelict at that time. This was a painting of the granary building. And this was a plan. It was just a forest of railway lines coming in. So the building we just saw is here, but all of these were railway lines coming in. They were trading in coal, they were trading in grain, they were trading in meat, in milk. The very first light brown beer came from northern England. Until that point, London has only ever been able to drink what was called stout, black beer, and suddenly brown beer was arriving with the invention of the trains from northern England. So it was an extraordinary place in its heyday. This was what it looked like in the 1990s. On the left there is St Pancras Station, and just here is King's Cross Station. And the area of our site was basically this whole area here. It's about 70 acres or 29 hectares of land. And one of the biggest challenges of it was that for 150 years, people had been arriving in trains at the front of these two stations and heading to central London. And we had to somehow turn them around and take them back to a place which, as it stood, was a place that was derelict. It was known for crime, prostitution, nightclubs. It was a bit of a police no-go area. It was the part of London that you you didn't go to by accident. You kept well away from it. And that was true right up until 2007. This was a dangerous, difficult part of London until that point. In 2007, that's what it had looked like. And there was one major change that had happened in that period, which was this. This was St Pancras Station, and the Eurostar had moved to St Pancras. Well, you'll see an image of St Pancras Station in a minute if you haven't been there. It is an extraordinary railway station. But essentially in 2007, this was still a derelict, difficult part of London. The canal that runs through it was inaccessible. That's what it was like walking along the canal. You can see the old gas holders that were still there. They all had to be brought down. The buildings were derelict. There were extraordinary pieces of history sitting in all of this, but it had been left to go to ruin, really, for best part of 100 years, because that goods yard actually only functioned in its real sense for about 40 to 50 years. So most of the 20th century, it was in this kind of state. That's now 2022. We've built quite a lot. For the last 10 years, we've spent about £1 million a day on construction on the site. So it's been a very intense period of delivery, and that in itself has been part of our challenge. And that's a view back from the other side, looking back into central London there. So you can see how it sits relative to the river, the City of London, and Canary Wharf, which is right out there on the left-hand side. So part of the rationale, part of the reason why it made sense to us, and of course everybody looks at it now and says, oh God, that must have been so easy, it's so obvious, that was always going to be a great piece of London. Well, it wasn't that obvious. We were the third developer who tried to do this, and twice it had failed before. But the fundamentals was around transport. You had 6 tube lines coming into King's Cross Station. You had 2 national railway lines heading out towards northern England, and you now had the Eurostar connecting you in 2 hours, 20 minutes straight into Paris. So the fundamentals of connectivity were extraordinary, and that's what made it attractive to us. That is the inside of St Pancras Station. You may have all been there. If you haven't, it's worth a trip. It really is. It was scheduled for demolition in the 1970s. Sir John Betjeman, the poet, lobbied government and stopped it being knocked down. So we owe him an enormous debt of gratitude. And there is the Eurostar sitting there with Europe's longest champagne bar, if you're interested, while you're there too. But very importantly, that the King's Cross development is wholly privately funded and privately owned, but is absolutely being impacted by £2.5 billion worth of transport infrastructure upgrades that have happened around it, both before and during the period that we have been doing it. This is King's Cross Station. London won the Olympics in 2006. By 2012, King's Cross had gone from being pretty derelict itself to being a rather snazzy railway station, because this was where so many people were going to come through to get out to the Olympic Park. So the UK government were determined that we were going to put on a good show, and this was all part of it. And of course, that was a massive benefit to what we were doing at that time. So I know that, from what I've just learned today, how important the Expo was to Lisbon. Winning the Olympics was incredibly important to certain parts of London as well. Let's go back right to the beginning, to 2001. I wasn't working for the company at this point, so what I'm going to say it should be attributed to those who were there at the time. Firstly, on the background, I don't know if most of you recognise that was the London A to Z. It was a book that you used to get, and before we had maps on our phones, this is how you got around London. And the architects actually drew up King's Cross right at the beginning on the A to Z, and suddenly that made it real to us all, to everybody. Everybody suddenly saw this as a real thing rather than some kind of just ethereal master plan. But the thing that was, I think, the essence and the basis of success at King's Cross was that for the first year, people talked and wrote and did not draw. The temptation when you've got a big site and you're a developer is you immediately get an architect and start drawing boxes and working out how much stuff you can get on there and how much that will be worth and doing an appraisal and all of those things that you do to see if it's economically viable. Of course, that has to be done. But if you start there, that tends to then stay with the development for its whole life. If, on the other hand, you sit down with a local authority and English Heritage and you sit there and you discuss and you debate what actually this development needs to deliver, both for itself and for the wider city, you come up with a manifesto of principles that then guide your thinking all the way through the development. They also act as a shared ambition, because so often development is set up to fail because it's adversarial, because a developer and a local authority, different ambitions, arguing with each other straight away, and again, that lives through the life of a development. By doing this, that shared ambition was published. This is a book, so those are just the principles, but each principle then had a kind of a written text that went with it about what that meant. But it meant that trust had already been built. Those discussions had been had at a generic level, and they weren't down to I'll draw a building and you either like it or you don't like it. You could point to the principles and say, does it deliver? So that was a really important part of the seminal moments right at the beginning of this process, and that resisting the temptation to just start drawing stuff. And of course, it led to a whole series of other books and documents that then were sent out for public consultation. And it built on those ambitions and started to create that framework and the parameters within which this regeneration would take place. So documentation of the process, talking about it, was really important. So was and within that you are articulating a vision. And there's this sort of way that we all know how you can articulate a vision. You kind of draw something and it happens, and you go, yay! The ambition was achieved, or the vision was achieved. But there's other ways of doing it. So a Section 106 agreement in the UK is the legal agreement that sits alongside a development. And it basically, it's a kind of tax, but it's actually things that you have to do. It's not necessarily money you're going to give, it's things that you're going to do. Build a school, build a construction skills centre, all those kinds of things. And the way that this was articulated for King's Cross was through people. So what would be the things that delivered for young people, for adult of working age, for elderly people, for preschool, for primary, for secondary school children? What were the things, and they were divided up. So that's another way of articulating a vision. It's not just about writing, thou shalt do, but it's actually thou shalt do because it will deliver for those people, that group of people. So there was a process that took 6-7 years. Before we got an outline planning permission for the development, and it delivered this, basically. That was the plan. These are the two stations down here at the bottom. It was about 50% offices, about 25% residential. And then there was retail and all of the other things that you need. Now, we're already 7 years into this development at this point. And as I said, things kind of change as you go along. And when you're doing a major development like this, it's the only real certainty is that everything's going to change socially, economically, culturally, whichever way you look at it. Technologically, things are going to change. And funnily enough, just when we'd got 7 years done, just when the banks had agreed to give us £600 million to go and build all the infrastructure that was required, this happened. And the £600 million was withdrawn, and there was no way we were now going to be able to borrow that money, and we literally had to come up with a new business plan because we didn't have a traditional means by which we were going to be able to deliver the infrastructure. And without the infrastructure, you saw the state of the site. You've got to put in all of that stuff underground. You've got to start building public spaces before anybody's going to believe you that you can actually live here or work here or do anything else here. So what happened next was quite miraculous in a way. We had been talking to the University of the Arts for 4 years, And we were due in November to sign a contract for them to bring Central St Martin's, possibly arguably the most famous fashion and design college in the world, into the centre of King's Cross as the very first building we built. Everybody thought we were kind of mad to do this. You've just seen that it was 50% commercial, and we were going to start by putting a bunch of art students in the middle, and that kind of wasn't what people did. We thought it was a good idea, but I don't think we realised how much of a good idea it was going to turn into. When Lehman's went down, in order for these guys to be able to sign with us, they had to sell 2 buildings in central London. And it was kind of a miracle because they did. In October of 2008, they sold those 2 buildings. And in November, we signed the contract with them to do this in the 2 months after the financial crisis had erupted. If that had not happened, I think King's Cross would today look very similar to what that picture was in 2007. Because I think it probably would have all collapsed. So it spins on a sixpence, these things. It spins on a sixpence. But there was 4 years of relationship building there, which really, really helped in that very important moment. The other thing that we had to do off the back of that was, because even though we had that deal, we still didn't have all the money to do the infrastructure. So we had all those offices, and what the original business plan was to build them, own them forever, and just kind of take the income. We had to change that. We had to sell long leaseholds and take proceeds for some of those offices, because that money would then come in and would pay for the roads. We had some cash at the start. We had seed funded a certain amount ourselves, about 300 million. But we needed a lot more than that to do this. So we did a deal with BNP Paribas, we did a deal with Camden Council, and ultimately we did a deal with Google, which I'll come on to in a minute, which brought money in and allowed us to literally pass it through, build a road, put a pipe in, put some more wires, put some benches, let's create some landscape and gradually build this place up. And that's how it happened. So it was, as it was known at the time, a miserable hand-to-mouth existence of just feeding money in. The investors had put money in 2008. As it turned out, they didn't get a penny back until about 2016. So this is all about long-term money. It's always been pension funds that have sat behind this. So long-term money has been very, very important. But that ability, if this had had public sector involvement, we wouldn't have been able to change the business plan in this way, but we did. This is the Google building. We did that deal in 2013. We're still building it. It will be open in 2025. It's designed by Bjarke Ingels and Thomas Heatherwick. Still going. It will be one of the last things that we finish on the site. But we have gone on to build about 25 other office buildings, and we've got about 25,000 people now working there. We have Google, we have Facebook, we have Sony Music, Universal Music. These are names that we couldn't have dreamt of in the early days, that have now come there and helped us and partnered with us to change the way this place is perceived. We've also built 1,700 homes there now, a variety of different places. This is the gas holders. So this was taking an old listed, it's a triplet, they're actually interconnected. It's the only one left in the world from that period. And we built residential inside it. These are others. And our final residential building has just finished just about 4 or 5 weeks ago. This is Cadence. And you'll notice as you're looking at this that everything's got different architects and different designs. We have 35 different architects, 7 different landscape architects. And we think that's really important in creating a place that kind of has a sense of evolution about it. We've also worked very hard on social environmental infrastructure. There's a primary school here. We've done a lot of work with sports. We have our own job centre. We have a skills centre. So a lot of these link back to that Section 106 agreement and those commitments then. For the sharp-eyed amongst you, you would have noticed that in the Principles for a Human City, there was nothing about sustainability or energy. Because in 2001, nobody was talking about energy and carbon and all the rest of it. We actually did quite a lot of work on it through the process, but it was all about operational carbon. When we actually came to build, it was all about how do you operate the buildings. And we built an energy centre on site, and we have a network, a hot water network that goes around the site. It was quite advanced at the time, back in 2008. It's pretty old hat now. But we have managed to get to the point where we've had to retrofit to the point where we are now a carbon neutral estate. We have a lot of work to do to get to the point where we could be net zero, but that's the ultimate ambition. So I've told you a little bit about this, but the thing I really want to try and get across here is this. It's the place that we've created. I'm an architect. I love designing buildings and all the rest of it, but King's Cross is not a success because of any particular building or any particular architect or architecture. You can like one building and you can not like the other building, and that's just what cities are like. It doesn't really matter in a way. What really matters is how you feel when you turn up there. Do you feel you belong to this place? Is this place yours? Does it belong to a developer? Does it belong to the city? Whose is it? And what rights do you have as a citizen to be there and do your thing? So this is not a real sign. We never put that there. It's a state of mind for us. It's a state of mind. But it's important in the way it underpins things. A place for people are words that are used way too easily by everybody these days. And if everybody really means it, brilliant. That's fantastic. But I'm not sure everybody does, and I'm not sure everybody really understands what they're saying when they do that. So what did it mean to us? The first thing was about, and the reason why we needed to sell some of those office buildings early was because we wanted to deliver public space ahead of when it was actually required. When you're doing something like this, you can't build a building and then kind of say, if you come here, then we'll build a square outside of it. You've got to build the square, because otherwise no one's going to believe you. You saw what this kind of part of London was like. So we had to build way ahead of need because we were changing perceptions. When you build ahead of need, that has two implications. One, you've got to pay up front to physically do it. And two, you've got to manage it. You've got to secure it. You've got to look after it. You've got to activate it. And that also costs significant money. For us, that came out of a marketing budget, in effect, because without these spaces, we couldn't market King's Cross. So this was kind of marketing, was building public space ahead of need. And as you'll see in a minute, building it really well. It had to be good. There had to be variety within it, but there had to be incredible quality with it all the time. And we had to absolutely ensure that we did not let those standards drop. So we were turning the handle on perhaps selling the long leaseholds on more offices than we would have liked, but we still don't regret it because it allowed us to do this. And it meant that we could convince people to come in, and the story has evolved in a way that I think bears out the fact that that was the right approach to take. I'm sorry, I'm suddenly aware that you can't see what I'm looking at. So, well, I mean, we had the benefit of the canal there, and we've tried to take maximum benefit from that. But that variety, different kind of places, was really important. I don't think I can overemphasize this either enough. The way that you activate these spaces right from day one. So right back at the very, very beginning, we started to put on some massive events. At this point, the Coal Drops is still derelict over here. The university is open, and we've done this sort of line of landscaping here. So we used to put on massive events in the early days. So this was Lumiere London. We paid a fortune to do this. 200,000 people turned up over 4 nights. We had no idea that many people were coming. The police turned up. We had to shut the road. It was dangerous on here. We learnt so much about how to manage things and how not to manage things. But what we also did was we created 200,000 ambassadors for this place where stuff was going on, and they went off and they told people. And in the early days, that was really important. And we put on a number of big events like that. And we still have some big events now, but actually over time they've become much smaller and much more regular. And you build that over time. But quality, 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 you have to set the standards that you want those events and those activities to portray to the outside world how that is talking about the future of what this place is going to be. The nature of that event has to tell you the standard of the office building that you're going to get in 5 years' time. That's the message that you are getting out there the whole time. And we put on all sorts of things here. This was wonderful. This was before we built anything. This was, we actually had a ballet going on in a bundle of old, these were kind of, what are those big, what are they called, probs? That's it, the big containers. And they'd been opened up and there was a whole, a ballet that was put on and everybody had to wear earphones. And that got thousands of people that came up. We had to extend that. We converted an old petrol station. This was a pool that was built on the park. It was there for 3 years. It was amazing. People came along, they paid £2.50. It was a natural pool. It was in the middle of the construction site. It was an art piece. And when we tried to take it away, there was literally people picketing outside our offices, so angry that we were taking it away. We had to keep pointing out the temporary swimming pool sign that was everywhere. But those things made a huge difference. As does food, and I'm going to start with food, and I'll come to the shopping. Food, right from the beginning, we knew that within a 1 mile radius of King's Cross, there were 80 different nationalities, people living in that area, okay? And food was something that brought them together. And we used that right from the early days. From 2010, we were doing street food, which at that time was not really a thing. But that brought people in, into this derelict space, and they started to see it in a different kind of way. And now it's evolved into a really sophisticated food hub for people. That's the coal drops now. So shopping, we have shops. A big part of the shopping is actually about creating active frontage. So many developments you go into, and you go through long street frontages which are completely non-activated. They haven't really been thought about by the developer because all of the value is upstairs in whether it's an office building or a residential building. That's where all the value is. And no real consideration has been given to how you design or how you actually fill the lower levels, and that's really important. And then looking after this. Really, really, again, a critical part of how we look at this. And we do it quite overtly. And people are, we have these red caps who are there. They are both there for security, but also for customer service. They're all trained in hospitality. And that's a fundamental part. They are the first experience. People come to King's Cross, they're not going to see me. They're going to talk to these guys. And if they give off the wrong message, if they treat people wrong, that sends, exactly the same as a hotel or any other kind of hospitality experience. So this is kind of just, these are the facts and figures. This is what we've ended up with. Our investors are very happy because their £150 million investment has turned into £4 billion. So it has, I believe, that all of those things I've just been talking about that ground floor experience, have resulted in enormous growth in rents, in values, and in the overall value of the place. So none of it is kind of, we're not doing it because we're just nice guys. We're doing it because it has genuine social and economic value if you do it, if you really, really mean it and you do it well. So that, for me, these are the three things that I take away from my experience on King's Cross that have made the biggest difference and the fundamentals of why this has been successful. It's that vision and shared ambition, spending that time at the beginning. It's the flexibility and the willingness to change when the context around you changes, whatever that might be. Ours was economic, but it could be something else. And that ground floor experience. So many people just think about what's going on. we focus massively on the first 6 meters and how that works as a human experience. So I'm not going to be as long with this one, but I'm just going to tell you now how we're translating that into the development which we've just started. We started on it 7 years ago, but we're kind of getting into the early stage of construction. Again, these things never happen quickly. Brent Cross town is in northwest London. Interestingly, with this one, this is an economic joint venture with the local authority, with the public borough, as the master developer who is putting in all of the streets and the infrastructure and all the rest of it. We have a separate hat as the developer, where we acquire plots and we then build the buildings. And we've managed to get a loan from Homes England, who are a government entity, for low-cost infrastructure loans. So we don't have to go and sell buildings to build this. We've actually got a loan from the government to be able to go and build roads and all the rest of it, which is very meaningful. So you can immediately see this is in a very different part of London. It's suburban London. The whole development is about between 10 and 12 million kind of square feet-ish. Land area is about 3 times the size of King's Cross. Developable area is about double the size of King's Cross. Really important part of it is transport again. It sits on the bottom of the M1 motorway, which heads out into north of the UK. It has an existing tube line, but it also has a brand new railway station, which is going to open on the 10th of December. And that will take you in 12 minutes straight into King's Cross and Pancras, where we were just a moment ago. So again, that's really fundamental. And that's the entrance to the new station, which, as I say, will be opening in just 2 or 3 weeks' time. That's the overall master plan. It's kind of numbers. I'm not going to read them all out. You've probably already worked out I'm not really... Numbers are really, really important, don't get me wrong, but I like somebody else looks after them. Because I think I can do things that will help the numbers rather than just focusing on the numbers themselves. I've always believed that. This is the bit that I kind of want you to remember, because we're going to come to that in a moment. But this, to give you a scale, this is about 1 kilometre from one side of the development to the other. This is the existing tube station. This is the new railway station. And this is the M1 motorway, which is the main strategic road that runs from London north through the UK. So we kind of wrote our own principles for a human city on this. We wrote a little book which talked about all the things that were going to be important here. Many of them are similar, but of course sustainability in all its forms was now a key part of it. And we boiled that down into 4 things that we wanted to promise that we were going to do here. One was around sport and play and participation. One was around flourishing, and I'll come to what I mean by that. One was around net zero, and the other one was about creating connectivity. So the first one, with sport and play, we were being blessed with that. Okay, this enormous 44-acre playing field as part of the master plan, with an outline planning permission to put some sports facilities on it, though very poorly designed. At the moment, the play area is that. Look at that. The rest of it is kind of muddy and not really very well used. So all of that space, there's a couple of football pitches here which are too muddy to use, and that's the play area on the whole thing. So that gave us quite an opportunity. So we have just, in the last 2 weeks, got planning permission for doing this. I'm not going to take you through all the details because it's a whole presentation just in itself. But what is fantastic, I'm an architect and a developer, and we get to design play and sport and all of these things. And we love it because we can see how this is going to make a difference in this part of London. We can also see how it's going to enable our development as well, by really focus attention on here. This is tough. It's £25 million to do this. Even if it's basic form, we'd like to do more than that. And you've got to find that money from somewhere. Some of it can come from those loans, and some of it might have to come from grants. Lots of images of what that will be. But the point here is that we are enabling development through that ground floor experience, and in this case, using a very large space. We wanted to create a place that would flourish. What we actually wanted was to say health and well-being is a really, really important part of this development. but everybody's going to tell you that. Okay, so we want to put science behind that statement. Okay, and we're going to do this through something that we call the Flourishing Index. And again, I'm not going to go into the detail of this, but we're working with a university and one of our consultants here to create this index. And what we're doing is we're going out, we've already gone out and created a whole load of baseline data about this place, quantitative and qualitative, and it has been written down. And it has been evaluated. And what we will now do, over the next 15 to 20 years of this development, we will continue to go back and measure this, and we will see what impacts we have. So we have baseline data to demonstrate what we are doing, the impact of what we are doing is having on that local area and on people. Whether that be good or bad, because some of it will be bad. And we will have to learn from the bad and admit to it and do something about it. And that's really important, that if you do this kind of thing, you put your hand up. And we think very carefully about ground floor experience. There's that detailed level of like, how do you design a shop and all the rest of it. But there's also this kind of heat map level. It's like, when you come out of the station, what's happening here? What kind of feeling is there? Where are the main clusters of activity going to be? How are you going to see from one to the other? Because it's only when we see that we move to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So this is thinking, this is urban city making as much as it is architectural master plan. I hate the term master planning. It sounds very top-downy. But this idea of city making and urban planning is where this really comes from. And we do some quite unusual things. We're trying to do some innovative things. We focus so much on what we see. Very rarely do we think about what we hear. And there's a massive body of science about how our health, both physically and mentally, is impacted by the sounds that we hear. At King's Cross, people always come and they say, I love your fountains. The fountains are amazing. They are just as impacted by the sound of those fountains and the children running through them as they are by actually seeing the fountains. That's a really, really powerful part about why that feature there is successful. So we have a sound and music strategy which is being applied in the public realm. It's also being applied in the buildings. And we have specialists who are helping us to do that. Right down to, we're enabling spaces for buskers. So the acoustics are right and there's a place for them to be. And we can kind of say they don't just have to come along and go, well, just go there or there. No, there's actually a place for you. It's there. And that's working with buskers. That's not just us kind of make it up, tell people what's right and what's wrong. Excuse me. That's stopped working. There we go. Net zero. We all, this is, when we talk to office occupiers in particular right now, it is the top of their list. Coming up very close to it is the social impact that they can have. But everybody, particularly from a commercial perspective, wants to know what's going to happen here. For a long, long time, I don't know why I've got a sticky... What? Try the other one. Yeah. There we go. Thank you. As I said earlier, previously we were very focused on operational carbon. We're now working really, really hard on embodied carbon. So we have got hybrid timber and concrete buildings here. We've just got planning permission for a 7-story totally timber-framed building. So I personally, I don't think actually that's the long-term solution to embodied carbon in buildings. I think actually it's quite important now, symbolically, to be doing this. As an industry, we've got to figure out how we get concrete, steel and glass to be zero carbon, basically. That's the solution to it, not timber. Is my belief in the long-term place. But right now, it's an important part of the journey that we are on, and we're working on that basis. And we're looking at operational carbon as well. We've done a 50-year agreement with Vattenfall, who are owned by the Swedish government. They're probably one of the most advanced energy service companies in the world. They run the energy services in Berlin, the whole city, and most of Amsterdam. They're frankly teaching us so much about how we do this. We've got the largest air source heat pump in Europe going into here. So hugely important part of this, both from a carbon perspective, but also if you're trying to attract office occupiers. It's a really important part they see. And there's a whole world that goes into that. And connectivity. We've talked about the railway lines and things, but actually it's so much more than that. That connectivity is about a cycling and walking strategy around the site. It's about trying to get to the point where 80% of the journeys that take place around and in and out of the development are done either by foot, by bike, or by public transport, and not by private car, which is the case at the moment. And it's about trying to enable people to live low-carbon lifestyles through that connectivity. And of course, all of these things are interlinked. I put 4 things up there, but actually it's a Venn diagram. They all come together to make this place, because if you do that, then you're working on the net zero. And these are just some of the buildings. This is our first residential building, and this is our first office building. We have a university moving into that building, who is a health-based university. So that links to what we're trying to do and reinforces it. And that's the site. That's where we are today. We have our pavilion, a little timber pavilion that we have here, and we are constructing. This is the station. You see the entrance here before the buildings have even come. This park we've built and opened because we're developing public realm ahead of need again. And these buildings are now coming up, and the purchasers can see the outlook for their apartments, so that makes sense for them. But it's also providing an amenity for local people here that they haven't had in 25 years. So the impacts are positive all the way around. That's the park, station in the background there. This is where we take people. This is, as I say, a timber pavilion that we've constructed here to bring people and show what we're doing. And I just wanted to talk about culture and art for a minute, because it's a huge part of what we've done at King's Cross. I didn't really talk about it very much there. And it's a huge part of what we're going to do here. And this is something that we chose to do because we felt it would send a message again about the future. This is actually an electrical substation. So behind that is the equipment for the substation, which we've had to put in order to turn the site on for those first buildings to open. But we employed a small firm of architects and an artist to come up with a surround to this, which would be a marker for the local area. This is about 30 metres high and about 60 metres long. It sits right on the junction where the railway and the motorway are, so it can be seen from miles and miles away. But all it's really doing is just stopping people from getting into a bunch of electrical power work. But it's symbolising something about change. And it's symbolising the nature of that change, and that art and culture will be an important part of that, along with the parks and the other things that people would come to expect. And that will play out in many different ways as we go along. And importantly, we have an invitation to everybody to join in with this. I think that's the other side of this. Development isn't just a top-down process. It requires the input from local people. And we use that pavilion to invite people in all the time to come and talk about. And sometimes they're really angry as well because we've done something wrong and we just have to kind of sit and take it. But that's okay. You need to hear that, and people need to have the opportunity to be able to say what they like and what they don't like. So I've been talking plenty now. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nick. Let's take a seat. I'm lost for words. Amazing presentation and insight into what you've been doing, what Related Argent has been doing. So I think it would be fantastic if you could answer some questions from the floor. So I invite questions from the floor. Stacey, I think.
Thank you so much. Stacey Delano from the American Club. I noticed on your website that some of your green spaces, I think in King's Cross, reminded me a lot of the High Line in New York. Was that an inspiration?
I think anybody who's been to the High Line in New York is inspired by that. And we happen to have an area that sits along just where the coal drops are, which was a fairly narrow strip, about 150 metres long. And yes, we were absolutely inspired by that. There was actually, we just got permission, not we, but London has given itself permission to develop something called the Camden High Line, which is about 1.5 kilometre long section of overhead railway, which is not far from our site, which, you know, we, along with thousands around the world, have been hugely inspired by that. And to just show that you can take something that seems to have no purpose anymore and turn it into something that not only, again, in terms of creating value, the social value is obvious, but, you know, from what I understand, the tax that has been brought into the city through the development that's taken place along it has eclipsed anything that was ever imagined. So value is created in numerous different ways when you get it right like that.
I think that's one of the interesting things. I mean, as developers, we do look for inspiration from all over the world, and it's one of the exciting things, isn't it, Nick?
Yeah.
You know, we constantly look for inspiration. I mean, you know, so many things that we have learned as developers by, you know, walking around areas like King's Cross. Next question.
I have questions. Your company do invest in the U.S., of course, London, England based. Is Portugal ever come into your target area? First question. Second question is, with the years of experience in this master planning, have any country ever go to your firm and say, hey, can you come to our country to do master plan?
Yes to the second one. We work on very few projects at a time, historically, because we're not a massive company. We're as big as we've ever been right now. We're 185 people, so we're kind of getting bigger. When I joined in 2007, we were 35 people. And we work on the basis that we do a small number of projects and we try to do them really, really well. Because if we lose control of it and we try to do too many things too big, then, you know, all of the good work that's been done over the last, 20, 30 years can be undone with one bad move. So have we been tempted to work abroad? We did go to Glasgow once and we worked there, and we got a bloody nose. So abroad was Scotland.
Scotland, and that was abroad.
So that was abroad for Argent, and we got a bloody nose and we left with our tail between our legs. So the honest truth at the moment is we have no plans to work outside of the UK. Obviously, we are partners with Related, who have offices all over the US, and I was recently in New York working with them on a project that they're doing in Manhattan. So we are influencing the other way as well, going back and trying to bring some of what we've learned, hopefully to influence and benefit some of the things that they're trying to do. So in that sense, there's a bit going on, but we're not, at the moment, we don't have any plans to work outside of the UK at the moment.
Pity. So, no, I mean, we need large transformational projects for Lisbon. I mean, you've heard about the housing crisis, and we need a whole other Pacto das Nações, in fact, I would say.
I mean, the one thing I would say about it is that, development is a local business. It isn't an international business because it has to be done with local understanding, local relationships, and with local people involved. Because if you don't, then you are, it's back to that sort of like bringing your master plan and plonking it down. If you don't do that really sensitively, with real understanding of the cultural issues you're dealing with, or economic issues, or any other issues that are relevant to those people in that place, then it will go wrong. It will go wrong. So one of the challenges for us is if we want to go somewhere else, we've actually got to get people to go and live there. You've got to get people and their families and everything else, and that's, in a small business like ours, that's actually quite hard to do. It's not like, some of the big guys, Lend-Lease, for instance, they employ, 40,000 people around the world, and they're moving people all over the place all the time. Maybe there's someone here from Lend-Lease, I don't know. So that wasn't a criticism, I'm just saying it's different. For a relatively small business like us, that's incredibly difficult to do.
Patrick.
There's a subject that you didn't mention, which is so evident in everything you said and your extraordinary success, is the quality of leadership of your group, your company. You talked about the two founders. You mentioned you've been there for 16 years, so there's an element of longevity. Is the culture of leadership special in this particular group? Could you describe it a bit?
I think that DNA point that I started off at the beginning is really important because it transfers from leader to leader and from group to group through the business. And as people come into our business, they get imbued with the DNA, or they don't, in which case they leave. That's kind of how it works. So the DNA is really, really important. I think each leader that the business has had has brought different qualities to it in their different way, but there is a thread that goes through it that is that DNA of just think about development from a slightly different perspective. Look through the other end of the telescope before you start the process. I have to say as well, I know people always say this, but that DNA spreads right the way through the team. So we have extraordinary people, a lot of whom have been with us for a very long time. And they're never going to lead the business, but they are leading huge components of what we do in a really effective way. So how that spreads through the business is really important. We have lots of leaders. They're all leaders in their own way.
Interesting point about organizational culture. So very important. Another question from the floor?
Hello. My name is Cristina Aroca. I'm a private consultant. I was wondering, when you started planning this project, you had several convictions about it and expectations regarding the uses and who will be the users of this project. Of course, there are always things never go how we plan them, but what I would like to ask you is, what was really beyond your expectations, both on the positive side or on the negative side, something that went completely different from what you were expecting on this project?
Yeah. So, the fundamental lessons is that humans never, ever do what you think they're going to do. You start with you get some clever consultant that comes in and does a plan that shows you where everybody's going to walk. So you do all this kind of stuff, and then they walk completely different areas. You go, hang on a minute, you can't go out and go, excuse me, we have to have you walking down here, not there, because that's what the plan says. And people just kind of do what they want to do, which brings you back to how do you then react to things that are different. There are so many things that have happened that we had never built a residential building before King's Cross. So we were a business almost 30 years old. We'd never built a residential building, so we built our first residential building here. And we built actually quite a good residential building. And the reason it was good is because we had no idea what we were doing. And when you've got no idea what you're doing, you're not constrained by all of the things that you've learnt over years. So, in the UK, the kind of house builder developers kind of have a set of rules that have, been developed over 50 years, and it's just like Meccano's. That's how you do it. And of course, no one's really thinking. They're just continuing to do the same thing. So when you do something for the first time, you make lots of mistakes, but actually you do it in such a way that you try to outperform the mistake, if you know what I mean. So you actually end up doing it better than you otherwise would have done. So we learned an awful lot about building homes for people. We could never have imagined how the economic value that was going to be created here. I think that's the thing that has actually shocked us the most. I was brought in to join the company to deliver a deal for one of the big grocery retailers in the UK, Sainsbury's, and they were going to take a giant office building at £35 a square foot on some crazy deal. It never happened because the global financial crisis happened, and they walked. They could have had this incredible building at King's Cross at £35 a square foot. We're now doing deals in space not as good as that at £95 a square foot, so almost 2.5 to 3 times that. And it has economically outperformed every other part of London over the last 10 years. So we couldn't have imagined that. The other thing that one of the principles was good for King's Cross, good for London. Okay, and that was all about how does this thing have a wider impact on the city. But we have people come to us now regularly saying, King's Cross hasn't just changed King's Cross. King's Cross has fundamentally changed London, because the knock-on effects to all the other developments that are happening and the quality standards that are now having to be adhered to in order to be able to be comparable are changing the way that London is being developed and thought about. And I don't think, even though we were trying to look at what was the wider context, I don't think any of us were ever bold enough or believed that it would have that kind of impact. And I still find it kind of odd when people come and say that to us. But I go and look at some of the other developments, and you go, you can see where people have taken their thoughts. So those things have really amazed me. And the last thing is, we do surveys and questionnaires of people quite regularly, and just like, the basic question is, why are you here? And the most regular answer that we get, and the most satisfying answer we get, is, I just like hanging out here. And that's the best answer that you can ever get. They haven't come to do anything in particular. They just like being there. And if you can create a place where people just like to hang out, you will create value in all the other stuff.
Yeah, fantastic. Absolutely right. If people want to be there, you've got footfall. I mean, economically, it's people.
Yeah.
I love to hang out there. It's so beautiful. And I love to go to Dishoom, which is one of the restaurants there. I just think it's fascinating. I mean, it's just Granary Square. Is that right? That's the name of the square. It's a beautiful square, and I think the restaurant is just phenomenal. Haven't seen anything like it actually in many places. It has 300 seats, I think, or.
Yes, this is Dishoom is not here.
Dishoom is not here. It's an Indian restaurant, but a new take on Indian food. I mean, historically in London, connection to India. I think British people at that time, the statistic was they eat curry, Indian food, at least twice a week. I'm sure that's increased in the meantime. But
well, the two founders of
Dishoom.
I was sitting with them one day, and they've now got about 15 of these around the UK, and they have this incredible thing where every single night, their restaurant is right outside our office. There are between 50 and 100 people queuing to get in, standing outside, often in the rain because it's London, at 7 o'clock in the evening, every single night of the week.
And the queue continues till 9
And
p.m.
the queue will stay there till 9 o'clock. And I asked the guys, Kavi and Shamil, originally from India, and I said, what's this all about? He said, I don't know how we've done this, but we've made an Indian restaurant that's cool for Indian people.
Absolutely, it's true.
Which in the UK is not generally how curry houses are perceived, is it?
No, it's very beautifully, interesting decor with like old pieces from Mumbai, and great menu, Indian street food with some classic biryani and stuff in there. But I've never seen such a successful place. I mean, and I've been to a few Dishooms, but the one at King's Cross is huge, across 4 floors, and so busy, so successful, even during the week.
Do you know the story behind it? I'm not going to tell you the whole story because it would take too long.
No, go ahead.
But they're cousins, the guys who own it, and they grew up with their fathers and their families all living in one house in Delhi, I believe. And their fathers set up a rice company back in the 70s, and they sold it 6 years ago. Tilda Rice.
Tilda, oh goodness, that's a famous brand. So
that's what paid for Dishoom.
Paid for Dishoom, yeah, explains something. So sorry, there's another question here. We're having a chat.
Hi. Anna from Spacecram. I have first is thank you for being an architect in a boardroom, because it's very important to have more creative people talking in boardrooms and having a different way and approach of anything. And the first question is, do you select your investors? Do you have a specific profile? Because you have a very different approach to investment, and how do you select your investors?
That's a great question. So the first thing is that they need to be long-term investors. So most of King's Cross is now 75% owned by the Australian Superannuation Fund. First major Brent Cross investor is a US pension fund. Our investor when we started King's Cross was British Telecom Pension Fund. Okay, so that's the first thing, is that you need people who are long-term. If you've got people who have a 5-year fund, don't invest in us, because the pressure is going to be on to do things, and you'll make decisions for the wrong reasons based on time, which you just can't do these kinds of developments like that. The other thing that has one of the most gratifying things that has changed over the last 10 to 15 years. So if I was doing a presentation on King's Cross in 2010, and I was doing a presentation to an office occupier, to a potential investor, and say a local authority, I would have 3 different presentations, because they all had different ambitions, and I'd have to adjust the way I presented this and where my emphasis was on what was most important, because I was playing to their. So what you had was a series of people who all had a really important stake in this, and they all had different ambitions. Now, that hasn't totally gone away, but one of the key aspects of that was, with an investor, you really wouldn't talk about sustainability, because they'd yawn and kind of like, oh, just get to the money. Just like not interested. Now, that ESG line is the top for the local authority, for the tenants, the office tenant, and for the investor, because they all have to show that they are buying in their various different ways to something that they can demonstrate to others is meeting certain criteria that's been set for them. And that is that's the best thing I can say that's happened on large-scale property development in the last 10 to 15 years, is that everybody is starting to sing from the same hymn sheet. And it's the reason why in the UK we are seeing a change in the way that we design, build and operate buildings for the first time in my career. Genuine change.
Thank you, Nick. Further questions? Architectural students, yes? So
no pressure on you, architectural students.
Architectural students, go on, ask your questions.
Hi.
Hi.
Bruno from Spacecram as well. How do you select the architectures that work in the master plan? So how is the process? Is it competition? Is it private competitions? How is the process?
I've got 2 different answers to this. I've got the truth, and I've got the one that I could tell you. We try to work in 2 parallel things. One is loyalty and long-term relationships is really important. And 2, bringing in new, diverse, smaller businesses to think differently and new is really, really important too. So I'll give you an example of something that we did. So part of the bit, and I'll tell you the truth, is I ran a charity for 8 years where we cycled from London down to Cannes every year, raising money. And I would go on those bike rides. And the great thing about those bike rides, for 6 days, you were sitting along all side these other people, literally just chatting all the way. And I was a developer, and of course, about 80% of the people on the ride were architects. So every time I'd get somebody come along, and basically I'd get pitched to by every bike that rode up next to me. I would say about 8 people that I met on those bike rides have worked for us in different ways. So
There's your trick, architects.
it kind of, building those relationships actually, in whatever means, is really important. But also there was one of them, we had an office building that we wanted to design, and I was really determined, Prabha will know all about this because she was involved in it. It was a plot called R7, and it went on to be called, the building is called R7. And we employed an architect who I'd met on the bike ride, who had never designed an office building and never designed a building over 50,000 square feet. And we had a 150,000 square foot office building we needed designing. And we wanted this building to be different from all of the other office buildings. We put a restaurant in the bottom, we put a cinema in the bottom, we put gyms in the bottom. We tried to make it so that the public areas were genuinely public, but also it was the entrance to an office. How do you get that? How do you create it so people can actually walk through it and feel able to come into an office building? Because most office buildings, you walk past them and there's a big barrier, and it basically says, if you don't work here, you're not welcome. So how do you make people feel welcome? And do you want them to make them feel welcome? Well, we did. And we employed this person, this organisation who'd never done this before. And the reason we did that, because if we employed somebody who knew what they were doing, we were just going to get the same answer. We had enough experience ourselves that we knew it couldn't go disastrously wrong. So we employed this person, and our building is genuinely different from all the other office buildings. So in that sense, it worked. The development manager has tried to kill me 3 times for doing it because it took twice as long and cost too much money. Okay, and therein lies the quandary, because everybody kind of wants to work with people who know how to do it. And if you're always working with people who know how to do it, you just keep producing the same thing. And so there is actually a time when you have to be brave and you have to step outside that. Getting Thomas Heatherwick involved in the coal drops was a pretty bold move, because we had an already extraordinarily complex building that we made twice as complex by involving Thomas.
I think if
But
you
look at the result.
The coal drops, for those of you who don't know what the coal drops building is, it's this fascinating building in King's Cross. Do you have a picture of it?
I'll try and get back to it.
Which is unusual. So that's what you're talking about,
Yeah.
Getting Thomas Heatherwick involved in.
I'm sorry, I've got a lot of slides to click
No,
through
it's
to get to
fantastic.
here.
It was such a great story. We're so grateful to get such an insight. But be daring, be brave is what you're saying. But that R7, overall it was successful and profitable, I'm assuming,
It was, but
Yeah.
largely because it's at King's Cross.
Okay, yes.
And because we got to the point where that's the coal drop. So so we had 2 sheds here, there and there. They were just 2 sheds. And Thomas came along and designed this whole thing, which has no support. Okay, so you can imagine the structural gymnastics that are involved in this whole roof basically floating above here. And it's all fed back through with incredible structure through here. So, we could have just refurbished 2 sheds and everybody would have been quite happy, frankly. But no, we got a 20,000 square foot space up here in addition, which was actually quite difficult to lease. But my God, is it memorable.
But it's
and my
got
God, does it bring people back.
amazing. It's got Samsung in there now. Who is
Samsung are in there,
Samsung
yeah.
in there. Beautiful space, actually. So that's 2,500 square meters of space up there.
But what Thomas said to us was, he said, he did all this amazing stuff about bits of paper and how it moved. But what was he was creating this covered heart, this space, because there was no cover there. So he was creating this space where there was cover. And you could come in and there were things that could now happen here that couldn't have otherwise happened. And it gave you a sense of enclosure which wasn't there before because it was too big. So it was actually, on a number of practical levels, it was really clever, very, very well thought out. But it's the kind of thing. So look, if all you had was those 2 sheds, and you were trying to do a retail development, you would never in a million years do that. As a standalone appraisal economically, it is a basket case. It makes no sense whatsoever. You're never going to make any money out of it. But if you believe that by doing that, you put £5 a square foot on the sales price of every residential unit and £1 per square foot on every square foot of office, it pays for it 30 times over. So do you believe it? It's like, and no one can, and the thing is, even if you do believe it, when it's done, you can't prove it.
Yeah, true.
Because it might have happened anyway. So it's kind of, all of this. I mean, are there any people who do appraisals here? No, good. They're kind of like, people come and show me appraisals, and I go, yeah, and I say, well, what if we press that and make that 22 instead of 21? And they go, oh, that's better. And I go, wow, it's just made up. It's just making
like
stuff
Excel
up.
spreadsheet.
I mean, of course, there's some, there is a structure. I'm not being silly, but you can make these things do and say whatever you want to do. The fundamental point about an appraisal for me is, what do you believe in? Mm-hmm. And that's got nothing to do with the spreadsheet itself. It's like, what do you actually believe in? And then put that back in the spreadsheet. And say, and when the number says that, you have to be able to say, I believe that because. It's like, what do you believe in? And when you're doing these projects, you have to believe. Well, Brent Cross, in the early days, I asked one of our people to go and do an assessment of the office values at Brent Cross. Could you look at a report, and I want you to do and come back and see whether you think. And they came back and they said, I said, what have you concluded? And they said, we shouldn't build any offices. I said, why? And they said, because there is no evidence to prove that we're going to be able to make any money out of it. I said, of course there isn't any evidence. There's no offices here.
No.
Do we believe?
Yes. And that's what, no one suggested we put a school here, by the way, an international school. If you remember, everyone said it should be on the western side of Lisbon in Cascais. And you're absolutely right. You have to believe. This is, we now have 650 students, Teresa. Yes. 610 students, sorry. That was, later in the year, 610 students, which is, round about the size of... Thank you, Bank. Thank you,
yes.
Ricardo and Bruno, for believing it. They were excellent partners for the school building as well. Caixa, the guys from Caixa. Put up your hands and take a bow. Ricardo, thank you for believing in us. So, are there any more questions from the floor? I think, we're having a great time here. If there are no more questions, I would like to thank you, Nick, but I'd like to invite Prabha onto stage to do a vote of thanks, because for those of you who don't know, Prabha is my sister, but more importantly, she's doing all the business development for us for the whole of the Education Hub, which are the buildings that surround us. You can find out a bit more about us, the projects around here on the CGIs around the back. But if it hadn't been for Prabha, I wouldn't have gotten to meet Nick or know so much about King's Cross. And Prabha actually worked with Argent for 7 years. 7 years, and it's been a great journey for the family as well, getting to know King's Cross. So, Prabha, may I pass the phone over to you?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So I was going to introduce myself. Exactly. My first, most important job is that I'm Chitra's sister. And then I also work with them, with Chitra and Roman and their team on the Education Hub. And now you see that I am qualified to work for the top developer in Lisbon because I worked for the top developers in London, grade A developers, placemakers. I was a good match. I really had this good fortune of working with a group of really committed, passionate people. You have seen this evening that Nick is one of these people, one of the leaders, and today the leader of this company. Nick, good friend of mine, great mentor and coach during my time there. So, my first thanks is for that time. And for you honoring that time that we had together by accepting our invitation, you really tonight, fascinating to see what you've done since I left. I hope it wasn't just because I left, but 10 years it has been, we were remembering today in the car, which is a long time, and but so many huge projects, and really the texture of what you saw there, so much more than bricks and mortar. That's really what I learned with Argent, with yourself, Nick. So thank you for bringing all of those different dimensions to us today, with the energy, with the passion. I really hope that, and I see that you, as the audience, have absorbed some of that, and I hope that you went away inspired and excited and energized to bring some of these learnings to your own projects. We certainly would like to bring some of that to create impact. That is what Chitra and Roman love to do. Now they did that with Sagres and Martinel, which you know well as well. Mm-hmm. And we love to do some of this here. So I'd also love to thank Chitra and Roman because they came back from London so excited in June. Like Chitra said, the whole family came with me on this journey. Following King's Cross. I joined King's Cross in 2006. I think just the year before Nick, and we it was such a small team back then. And left in 2013, and you remarked, how much it had changed when you guys were back there enjoying it with your kids who are now adults, right? This summer, and Chitra came back and said, let's bring someone from King's Cross because we'd love to share that with the Lisbon community. And I asked Nick not just because he's the managing partner of Argent and the leader and my friend, but also because you're a great storyteller, right? And I think you enjoyed that this evening. So thank you, Nick, for that.
Thank you.
And thank you to them.
Thank you, Prabha. I couldn't have said it better. A huge thank you. And actually, the little story behind why I love King's Cross so much is because when I moved to London as a student at University College London, to read electronic engineering in 1989, which was around the time the early pictures, you said in the 1990s. I lived really close to King's Cross in halls of residence at Cartwright Gardens, and I would consciously not go to King's Cross Station, take the tube back to King's Cross Station. I'd actually get out at Russell Square or Euston Square because it was so dangerous and it had, a red light district and prostitutes and druggies, and it was not it was a very dodgy area, as you would say, but the transformation has been incredible, and the knock-on effect on the local area has just been enormous. They've done a calculation where it's the Keynesian multiplier. Every pound you invest there, the knock-on impact on everything else around it is huge. So, thank you very much. And I'd like to invite Patrick, the president of the American Club of Lisbon, to stage now to say a few words.
So briefly, wow, Nick, thanks for sharing with us. 2020 hindsight, it was a great success. Must have been easy, right? I'm struck by the example that you give. Success and failure are so close one to the other. It takes so little to fall one way or the other. You describe that had St. Martin's not taken this very bold step of selling the two buildings, probably the whole thing would not have worked. What is the difference between success and failure? There's an element of luck, but there is vision, and there is the quality of leadership. And I have in front, to my right and to my left, two wonderful examples of leadership. And I admire you whom I met tonight. We can all admire Nick's incredible journey and be appreciative for his sharing it with us. And I admire my dear friend Chitra and Roman for what you have accomplished and what you have contributed to Portugal. Also, what you contributed to the American Club. We are proud to have you as sponsors, and we are very proud to be associated with this wonderful event for which, Nick, you have enthralled us and enlightened and shared some of your vision, and let us hope that each of us can carry on with our own vision to perhaps emulate this wonderful success of this marvelous man. Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words, Patrick. And, well, we have come to the end of an amazing evening. Thank you very much,
pleasure.
Nick. Really,
Thank
we have
you.
learned so much, and we're so inspired. I, for one, am so inspired, by these stories. I hope you all are, and I hope you've had a wonderful evening, as great an evening as I have. And I think there's still some drinks. There's food and drinks at the back. There's a lot of food and drinks. Please do continue to mingle. For those of you who came later, let's meet people, let's chat, and have a great evening. And thank you all for the interest and the enthusiasm in coming, and stay in touch. All the best. Thank you.